first off, I want to thank you all for taking part in Creative Careers this evening. You know, there's a lot going on, and you guys sharing your time is amazing. So thank you so much for this. So let's everyone get started by just saying hello to everyone else who's tuning in and taking part in this this panel with three amazing creatives who have fantastic careers where they're introducing creativity and design into it. I should also say thank you for taking part in this Hive workshop. We're really trying to continue to have some great conversations right now, virtually, online, or what have you, to keep us all engaged and looking forward. So why don't we start with Gail? Gail Gallagher, how are you doing?
Doing well, thanks. Good to be here.
So would you tell us where you're from and a little bit about yourself, to let everyone out there know a little bit about why you're part of this panel?
Sure. So my name is Gail Gallagher, and I grew up in Washington State and then came to Pomona as a student for undergrad. And at Pomona, I was part of the original Hive design team. So I'm starting my sophomore year, part of the Creativity and Innovation Initiative that eventually kind of grew into the Hive. And so wearing my Hive shirt proudly. And it was a place that really deeply transformed me and really helped me think about my life and the impact I want to make in the world in a different way. And partly out of that experience, I ended up deciding to become a teacher. And so I currently teach 10th grade science here in Southern California. And it's interesting, when I first was asked to be on this panel, one of my first reactions was, are you sure? I don't directly use design in my career in the same way that some of the other panelists do. But that being said, I use, in some ways, teaching as a constant series of design decisions, and I draw on design mindsets each and every day. And so I'm really excited to get to talk with you all a little bit about that journey for me so far.
Wonderful, wonderful. And you mentioned the Hive, so I should just add a little bit more context. So the Hive is the Center for Innovation here at Pomona. And well, I should say here at the 5 Cs at the Claremont colleges. We are a resource for all of the 5 colleges: Pomona, Pitzer, Claremont McKenna, Scripps, and Harvey Mudd. And our goal is to help students to amplify their creative potential, develop and nurture creative confidence, and then also collaborate and come together here at a hub where we're sort of a neutral, open space for all of the students to come together and bring their diverse, unique perspectives and cultures from the 5 different colleges together to create and design awesome things and to reimagine the disciplines. So thank you for mentioning the Hive, and thank you for taking part in making this this institution what it is today. So thanks so much, Gail.
Thanks.
So with that in mind, I should hand this over to Timothy, who I met here at the Hive when I started 2.5 years ago as one of the early postbacks and architects of what the Hive is today. But now you've moved on, so can you tell us a little bit about where you are and how you arrived there?
Yeah, so yeah, there's some good overlap between Gail and I when we were at the Claremont colleges. She was there as a student, as a senior, and then I was there as a postbac, or a postbaccalaureate associate, as a formal title. And I was really excited to work out there for 2 years. I was an industrial design major. I was really passionate about education. I still find myself working at the cross sections of design and education. And so after graduating from the Hive, I guess you could say, I moved to New York City, and I work at a small design innovation and culture consultancy. And I think like we don't really have this on our website, but basically we're just hell-bent on bringing humanity back to the workplace, trying to bring compassion and empathy and true people first leadership to the forefront of what we do on a daily basis in the working world. And that's in a nutshell kind of what I do for a living. I try to train people in, you know, in innovation and these different methodologies that help people understand what others are going through and actually kind of use that to actually improve your return on investment at the end of the day. I'm calling in from Michigan, Detroit, Michigan, which is my parents' home. That's where I was born and raised, and this is actually my childhood bedroom. And yeah, that's where I was born and raised, and I'm just happy to be tuning in tonight for this whole thing. As a quick artifact, I have my grandfather's race car helmet right here.
Whoa.
So I just thought I'd show that off for y'all. See if I can put it on. Oh, it's really hard. It's from Argentina. Oh, there we go.
Nice. That's amazing. That's amazing. Fantastic. Thank you so much. All right. And then Victor Saad, want to tell us a little bit about, you know, who you are and what you're doing and how you arrived there.
Sure. Yeah. Hey, I'm Victor, and it's fun to see Kareem, you here, and Fred. I see your name there. I think I saw you earlier on the just saw a glimpse of you. I actually first met Fred, I think, a couple years ago at the D School, a few years ago now, and didn't make the connection to the Hive until more recently. And I met Kareem at a DFA conference or symposium a year ago, not even 9 months ago or so. And I got introduced to the Hive's work. So I'm not a Pomona grad, but very much interested in the world of design, business, and social change. In fact, before all this, I was a youth pastor working in the suburbs of Chicago, and really got interested in business and design, and decided to, instead of doing a traditional master's program, I designed my own master's by doing 12 projects in 12 months all over the world. And it happened in 2012, which was a leap year. So I called it a leap year project. And then I ended up doing a talk and a book project, and then starting an organization called Experience Institute, all focused on helping individuals launch their next step in their careers through experiences. So short-term projects or innovation projects inside of their companies and so on. So now, sort of similar to Timothy, trying to find out how to best help, whether it's the workplace or universities, help people grow and learn through transformative experiences. And that shows up through innovation workshops inside of companies, or travel and work study programs for universities. And all that's under our little studio in Chicago called Experience Institute. And then I teach at, I think Timothy's there too, at Stanford, running a program called Design Summer, and travel back and forth a couple times a month, well, up until all this happened. So it's been a fun sort of lab to experiment there at the D School.
Yeah, that's, well, thank you as well for taking part in this. Yeah, so Victor and I met at Design for America, a symposium, back in August, and I was immediately reminded of a wonderful friend of mine, Kaori, who was taking your program while I was also at the D School doing a fellowship. And what I loved was the notion of her being an apprentice, right? Like, versus a fellow or a student or an intern, you know, really, you know, pulling from like tradition and some of our historical ways of learning and educating ourselves about professions. And this idea of apprentice really stood out to me. So when I met you, I was excited because I really wanted to talk to you further, and I saw a great deal of opportunity for us to collaborate here at the Hive. And we've been toying with some ideas, still looking for. We actually have been practicing your leap kit. Two of us have taken it on and are trying to do some leaps
Cool.
in your footsteps. So that's been pretty great. So thank you all for taking part in this. One of the fascinating things, one of the things I really was like, so one of the things that I was really excited about was the idea of design and creativity, right? Like in terms of this panel and what does it mean to be creative? What does it mean to do design or be a designer? Because you're all coming from such different spaces. You know, and I was actually interested in how you all saw yourselves within that framing. Do you think of yourself as a designer? Do you think of yourself as a creative? How do you engage those ideas? Well, Gail, why don't we start with you, because you began to touch on that a little bit when you were describing what you're doing today as a teacher.
Sure, yeah. So I think teaching is one of the most fundamentally creative things that I've ever done in my life. And in the sense of it being such an ambitious undertaking when you really think about it. You know, every day I'm partially responsible for, in my case, 70 15-year-olds, and creating the lessons, creating the experiences, designing the opportunities for them to learn, not only learn science, but become better people through the process and discover their purpose and figure out how to transform their communities and all these really important things of being human. And that's really difficult. You've got 70 different personalities, at least, and those can change by the day, and it's really complex. And so it takes a lot of creativity in that sense. It also takes a lot of creativity because education has so many different constraints. We've got constraints of time and funding and regulations, and figuring out how to be creative with what we've got is hugely important. And so I think, and then more explicitly, in terms of design, when I was at the Hive, one of the things that I learned is you want to go through many different cycles. When you're trying to design something, you don't get things right the first try. You have to try again and keep trying and keep iterating. And teaching really demands that of you. You're designing these new opportunities every single day, every single interaction with students. And the more intention I can bring to that through a design perspective, the better I'm serving the community that I'm working with.
Amazing. I wonder, so prior to going into the teaching profession, did you, like, as you were studying and working here, you know, I guess working here at the Hive, did you go into that space thinking of the degree of creativity and design that was going to be asked of you? Was it a surprise, or was it expected?
Well, so I think when I first worked at the Hive, I expected the creativity piece. I didn't expect the teaching piece. So I didn't decide formally to be a teacher and continue in school to get my teaching credential until during my senior year at Pomona. And it was actually, and so I was a biology major at Pomona. I took place in research experiences my junior and senior years. And it was actually, it kind of worked the other way around, where I got involved with the Hive because I was looking for opportunities for collaboration and interdisciplinary study and just trying new things. And then through the Hive and the human-centered design course, I realized how meaningful that work was for me and how I really wanted to have a more direct impact on people. I really enjoyed helping people at the Hive become better versions of themselves and kind of take on more roles in our community there. And so that's what led me into teaching.
And then in that path, would you, I guess the thing that I was wondering was, did you expect creativity to be a part of your responsibility as a teacher, and design to be a part of your responsibility as a teacher? Or now that you're there in that role, you know, is it a surprise, and if so, to what degree?
I think I expected it to require creativity, because part of the reason why I became interested in education is it's this massive tangled, wicked problem that, you know, it's this really messy system where it's incredibly complex. You have so many human elements and societal elements, and not even mentioning the content that you teach. So I think I knew that it would require a lot of creativity. I think I still nonetheless learned a lot over the past couple of years about myself as a creative person and what kinds of experiences I would have and challenges that I would rise to. And I feel like I've had to kind of take the creativity that I experienced on campus and figure out how that shows up in my career and in the new context. So I've definitely been figuring that out, but I guess I'm not surprised that it demands a lot of creativity from me.
Awesome. And I guess if we're talking about teaching, I think, you know, each of you is playing in that role to a certain degree. I think maybe, I don't know, Victor, would you agree with that? I think that your role is somewhere tangential to it, but maybe not exactly that. How would you describe your framing of design and creativity in your life?
Yeah, well, first of all, I do not have, was it 70 7th graders? How many? I'm sorry.
I have 70 10th graders.
70 10th graders. I do not have 70 10th graders in my care. And that is a whole nother level. So that's impressive. I should be clear that I totally stumbled into education. Like I got into the space because my parents had a really messy divorce, and my heroes were, I was in the middle of the Bible Belt. My heroes were youth pastors, and there were all these really cool programs that could keep me out of the house. And so, you know, the first thing I thought about doing after, you know, high school was go do what they did. I was supposed to become a doctor, lawyer, engineer, whatever a good Middle Eastern boy is supposed to do. But like that, being around them was really helpful. And then I studied education in college, and then went and worked with middle school and high school students for a while, and more so after school programs. And I wasn't really an educator. I just loved being around people who were growing up, or growing in their, you know, finding their way in the world. And then whenever I had to find my own way, decided to I had no idea what design thinking was. I was a total newbie to it. And so again, I just kind of found my way by just solving my own problems, and then built Experience Institute because there were enough people with a similar problem. And so now I feel like all of that has just set the foundation for how I think about things now. It's like, where's there a problem to be solved, and how do we solve it? And I've just tried to focus a little bit around education to create some, you know, steady theme. And education to me is just like a mask for sort of like self-help and growth and personal growth. And it's this sort of societally acceptable, credible way to talk about when you just feel lost. Learn, be curious, educate yourself. And so sometimes we do that with degrees and credits and, you know, big institutions, and sometimes we do that with a good book, or, you know, a trip, or whatever it might be. So I think my role, or what I see, what I'm trying to contribute to in the education space, is just to elevate those, sometimes the kinds of learning that get pushed to secondary or tertiary parts of either companies or institutions, things where people are more the owners of their learning, and where they feel like they need to be more creative to understand or discover what they want to discover. So building tools or curriculum, or even couching like self-design learning and innovation programs. Yeah, anyway, so that's sort of, you know, just kind of trying to figure out how to help people solve these problems, not necessarily as an educator, even teaching. You know, now I feel like I'm just building a workshop because students have this whatever challenge, like they're trying to figure out how to make their summers come to life, or how to design an internship, or, you know, how to build a product as part of a class. Like, I don't know. So I think, yeah.
One of the things that, as you're talking, you know, you're developing and designing a lot of of like experiences and products even, right?
Yeah, sure.
And so how do you consider yourself a designer? Like, how do you even, frame yourself in that then?
I feel super sheepish sitting next to like Timothy, who studied industrial design, right? Like that, and I work out of the, the School of Engineering, where I'm watching, part-time at watching students develop such incredible things. I think I'm, I don't know, maybe a lowercase d designer, and I'm sitting in front of a product that like was totally like a part of my, like it was just an idea on a sheet of paper, and it's this like deck of cards that I had to figure out how to manufacture and put together and work it all out just right, and I loved all of that. So am I a designer? Sure, I am. I think there are just probably varying levels of design, and in certain circles I would just be really careful with the term. Just to like, I think I have a certain, it's sort of like someone who says, I don't know, like, am I a soccer player? Yeah, I love soccer. But if I was in the room with like an MLS, like Landon Donovan, or if I was in the room with, insert any other, whatever amazing soccer player, I would say yes, but he's a soccer player, so that's the kind of stuff I'm just careful with the term design a little bit. To make sure that it leaves room, that I don't hijack it for my own purposes, but more so I want to be a generative designer that's like, here's what I want to contribute, and more of a problem solver in this particular arena. I don't know though. Yeah, I don't use it. I don't use it liberally. That's for sure.
Yeah, I'll jump in there and say that like, yes, you are a designer. And I'll say that I think that's what's gotten really interesting with design and creativity more broadly over the last, like, I would say the last like 20 years or so, is that people are no longer associate design with like design of the tangible things, like the graphics and the physical objects and the cars and the bicycles and the toaster ovens and whatever. And design has really transitioned into a place where we can kind of shape the intangible things as well. And we're using kind of design as a mindset and almost as a philosophy to help us think about how we shift people's behaviors and mindsets, and how we shift them toward a desired outcome that might help them see a more like valuable way of living, right?
Yeah.
And so I think that's like, I think you are a designer because and same with Gail, because you guys are both designing intangible things. You're designing somebody's experiences, and you're helping like shape something in their lives.
Sure.
Yeah.
Sure. So
I
Tim,
appreciate that framing. Yeah. I wonder, in the context of like, when is there a time when we should delineate between like a sort of capital D design and a lowercase d design, or is it okay to just like, because I'm watching even the conversation around design thinking, and for those of you who don't know, design thinking, is a process that Hive uses to that's sort of originated out of Stanford and IDEO and a bunch of other actually really great people who outside of even Stanford who've been working on this in the 60s and 70s, blah, blah, blah. But the point is like, it's proliferated this idea that all of us can be designers. And I love that. And it's also kind of gotten hammered at times for being like, for maybe making it too bottom shelf, like too quickly accessible. And I just don't know, should we be propagating, not propagating is a negative term. Is it okay to spread the mentality that everyone is a designer? I'm not sure sometimes. And so I'd be curious.
Let me ask a question then, because I guess when you talk about credentials, right? How do you gain sort of like credentials, and like how do you build expert? How do you become an expert? How do you do the things necessary to say that I can do X, right? And it is recognized. And so it sounds to me that the biggest issue and throw this out to you guys, or also to you, Timothy, and I put them in ether as well, that designing, right, is an activity, and more so than a profession. It is a thing that one does. But when one makes that their profession, or one is consistently activating that as a part of their profession, and are getting respect and accolades, and are moving things forward professionally in that vein, maybe then that's how you then begin to define Big D design, right? Or Big D designer, versus having graduated with this degree that says it. I mean, Bill Gates, one of the most, you consider a designer, right? But does he have a degree in design? Not necessarily, right? Like he kind of dropped out, but he did the work.
Yeah, I appreciate that mentality a lot, actually. I think someone who is, and whether it's designing curriculum or designing, automobiles, can they point to the work, like the problems they've actually solved, the things they've tinkered with, the things they've broken? Because all of that, like design is, I love that. I mean, I would just be reiterating what you just said. I think that's a great way to frame it, Kareem.
And then Tim, I mean, the work that you've been doing is all about helping organizations, engage this practice as well, right? Can you talk to us a little bit about your framing and how you think of design? Do you call yourself a designer? Do you call yourself creative?
Yeah, I mean, I still consider myself a designer just because I feel, well, for one, I want to say that like I always forget the difference between big D and little d design, so I'm just never going to acknowledge that whole framework because I'm always forgetting like which one represents. But I mean, if going back to that question is like if we really wanted to delineate between the differences between design, there is ways of doing that, but it's like involves like learning experience design, or you can call yourself a design educator, or there's graphic design. But overall, I think it's us using the term liberally. I think it's an okay thing. I think there's a lot of other terms out there that people use liberally, and if it helps somebody embody a set of abilities and mindsets and skills that could be healthy for them making a positive impact in the world, then I'm okay with that person calling themselves a designer. But what I do at the design gym, and a little bit about what I do at Stanford, and I also have a third position with another organization down in Virginia, is we're always kind of thinking about, and I mentioned this earlier, thinking about the behaviors one's coming in with when they walk into the door and what they're leaving with. And so when it comes to like big companies and making a culture shift at a company, which is largely what the design gym does, we essentially look at like a behavior signature. What is like the key things that they're struggling with, and what are the things what is their usual mode of operation? Like actually looking at how they do their work on a daily basis. Are they approaching it as like, I'm just going to try to keep the status quo? Or are they approaching it as a way of like, I want to like rattle the status quo a little bit so I can maybe get to a new place that's better with my work, and so I can get the company to a new place that's a little bit more innovative, that's a little bit more focused on the people that we're designing for and servicing. So at the design gym, we kind of are at this interesting place where, we call ourselves design, the word design in the title of our company, but at the end of the day, we're really not designing any sort of physical products or anything that's really tangible. What we're really designing is these intangible experiences, these learning experiences for folks who are willing to jump into figuring out how to, like I mentioned earlier, kind of rattle the status quo a little bit in an effort to design for the greater good. And these are usually companies that have brave leaders within them who are actually willing to not only acknowledge the fact that they could probably do a better job at designing for the humans at the end of their products and services, but also do a better job at designing for the people who are immediately around them. And so what's really interesting is like we say like human-centered design and design thinking is always about designing for the end user, but sometimes the end user is your coworker, or sometimes the end user is actually the people on your team who are just struggling to figure out how to get aligned on a task. And so we're trying to like we take into compass all the people within your community of an organization, the stakeholders, the end users, your beneficiaries, everybody. And we try to say like, okay, how can you use human-centered design principles to improve their experience? And so at the end of the day, I think the design gym is just rooted in design thinking and human-centered design, but we're just trying to apply it in a more broad way. And we do that through creating, smaller touch points, such as like 2-day workshops, but then we also do that through like multi-year programs where we bring everybody from the people who take the service calls to the people who are executives through programming that helps them have this like shift in mindset, where they start to acknowledge more that like they could do a better job at understanding what their end users or what their beneficiaries are doing. And I keep using the word beneficiaries because one of our more recent clients is a company that's like 175 years old. It's New York Life. And New York Life is an insurance company that's been around forever. And we are trying to touch base with everybody in that company, from the people who are getting paid like minimum wage to answer the phones and helping them figure out a better way to like create a better experience for the people they're answering the phones for, all the way up to the executives who are trying to figure out how to use human-centered design to better shift and better manage and provide better strategy for their company. So in a nutshell, that's kind of what we do. And I don't think any of us on the team really, I think I'm the only person on the team actually who has a degree in design, but everybody else on the team considers themselves designers. So, I mean, I think we're all good with that. Yeah.
Well, what I think is another sort of through line here is this idea about humanity. Like each of you mentioned some way, shape, or form trying to make a better place for folks. Trying to, whether it be Gail with trying to create better humans through like science and learning and appreciation of the world, or Victor just trying to get folks to appreciate being here as humans, right, and their engagement with everything, and then Timothy, you're just trying to engage humans in this organizational sense. And it makes me, it brings me back to where we are right now. Here at the Hive, this idea, we're in this liberal art, in these liberal art institutions where, students are not leaving here with design degrees. They're leaving here with degrees that help them to think critically, engage, take part in the human experiment. And one of the things I think the Hive is all about is trying to bring this process that design has into this institution. And I would love to hear a little bit more about just how you were studying, right? When you were students, like how you're studying, what you were studying, and how what you were studying has sort of transferred or played a part even in this new space that you're in. As a creative professional, as a designer, right? And yeah, you talked a little bit about it in terms of science, studying in biology, but also studying or practicing here at the Hive. But can you talk a little bit about like how the two blended in a way, or how they blended? Your experience with your undergraduate work and with the practice of creativity and design in your current professional space.
Was that question for me or Gail?
Oh, it was for Gail, sorry.
That's what I thought. Looks like your mic might be working. We can't quite hear you, Gail.
Okay, the host needed to give me permission to unmute.
Okay.
So yeah, I mean, the question you asked is like how, if I understood correctly, was how do all these different pieces of my education, the biology, the design education, now the teaching education, kind of how do all those blend together? I think that, well, so first I want to be clear that I majored in biology at Pomona, but I also had a very broad liberal arts education too. And I think that both the breadth and the depth of my Pomona education have been super important. I think what biology gave me was first the content understanding, to be able to really understand science deeply enough that I can understand students thinking about science and then how to shift their thinking about science. But then on an even more fundamental level, I really loved biology because of its complexity and because of all the ways that, all of these different pieces, within a body, within the world, within any phenomenon that you observe, like it's all incredibly complex with all these different parts that are influencing each other. And that appreciation for complexity and systems is something that I brought into my perspectives on education. To give a specific example, in biology, you talk a lot about feedback loops. So the ways in which different kinds of actions either tend towards stability, towards if you go away from a set point, the system will tend to bring it back, or that it'll amplify differences from a certain set point. And you see that in education system too, where right now in the distance learning space, you've got certain kinds of forces that are trying to bring things back to the status quo. And then you've got other types of forces that are trying to push things away and saying that this is a moment where we can build on the disruption that's already happening to make an even deeper shift. And so I think some of that perspective comes from the biology point of view. Then layered onto that, I got this crash course in design for a couple of years at Pomona. And that, I will say this anytime, the most important thing I took out of that was the mindsets more than any particular tool.
What were some of those mindsets?
Yeah, so being able to wrestle with ambiguity and be okay not having one right answer to a problem. To like the others were talking about, thinking about human needs, and not even just the most obvious human needs or the most obvious solutions that you can come up with, but like really digging deeper to try to understand what's going on in people's lives that causes certain needs to come up. The ideas of like prototyping, so where you don't want to spend hours and hours and hours creating a perfect solution only to launch it out in the world and find you were solving the wrong problem all along. So coming up with ways that you can test your ideas early, get feedback, revise, be able to collaborate, be able to look for inspiration in other fields, like all of those kinds of mindsets were more impactful and were more the things that I use on a day-to-day basis than any specific steps or tools or anything like that. And then on top of that, it was really important to me that I actually, while I was at Pomona, I took a CGU course on a Claremont Graduate University course on teaching, which that was when I was first deciding to become a teacher. And one of the things that it did was make it clear for me just how complicated teaching was and how I really ought to go on and get my teaching credential before I set foot in a classroom and got put in charge of students' education. And so that layer of the pedagogical practices and ways of thinking about teaching and learning, like kind of just merged with all of those things. And I'm still figuring out exactly how they're all connected, but they're all a really important part of what I do now.
Okay. Yeah. I asked because I think that when you start out, especially in like liberal arts, your path is, you use the word ambiguity, right? There's a very ambiguous component to, what tomorrow will hold or how you're going to utilize those tools.
Yeah.
And I find it fascinating. I appreciate the idea of introducing design into that process and then allowing that process to sort of amplify, right? This more in-depth knowledge that you have, right? And,
yeah.
Hey, Victor, what are your thoughts? So let me move this over back to Victor and talk a little about, this idea of ambiguity, right? Like, I mean, that's something that sounds like was a big part of your launching into your current space, your current career.
Cool. Yeah, I think there's this like sort of leveling that happens around ambiguity where, I mean, we use it a lot in the design world. I think it's just this sort of like, OMG, I don't know. Like, I mean, if I were to like retranslate ambiguity to just like the more layman terms, and I, so like, for example, being 25, 26 and thinking about a master's program and like, I'm not going to do the traditional route. Like I'm going to try my own version. Or like, you know, trying to figure out like, how do you build curriculum when you're not, or and build curriculum and find students and try to build a program when you're not a formal school and you're trying to like essentially start a school. Like what? Like OMG, I don't know. Like and I love what Gail said about bringing up prototyping, about just trying small things and trying them with some intention. You know, being caught like aware of sort of what it is you're trying to learn and being really clear about that. Trying something, learning it, like, did it work? Did it not work? Why didn't it work? And making adjustments. Like, you know, the first thing that I tried to do wasn't a prototype. I don't have a regret about this, but like when I launched Experience Institute, the first thing we tried was a 12-month program. That is not a prototype. That is like, that's an awful prototype. That is like so much time, so much money, like such a long tail before you really got to all the learnings. I could have gotten to so many more learnings if I would have tried and started with an evening thing, a weekend thing, a week-long thing, a month-long thing. And you can't stay in the world of prototype forever, but you kind of can. I mean, you can kind of keep iterating, and then it could take you years before you really feel like you've crystallized. And even still, I mean, I kind of like staying in the world of like, I'm still tinkering with it all.
I was gonna ask you. You don't seem to have left the world of prototype. You seem to sort of really like sitting in it nicely. I mean, when I think about can you talk a little bit about that initial experience, like that 12? It was like 12 months, 12 different countries and 12 different experiences. Like just the thing that even brought all this to life itself was a body of ambiguity, right?
Yeah, and remember, so like you were asking earlier about like what we studied and how we're using it today, and you know, as I studied adolescent psychology, I went to a very small Christian school. It was a Bible institute. I mean, like it was such a conservative place, and I learned a lot there. Very different philosophies now, but like really grateful for those years. But you know, I think the character things that taught me was helpful. But as far as how to sort of navigate the marketplace, I felt like I was just such a newbie. So I think one of the things I learned really early on though was that if you could enter into new spaces with a sense of like, don't try to be spectacular, try to be helpful. Like just find whether it's the broken printer that needs to be fixed, the phone call or the phone that keeps ringing, or the client that's coming in and needs an extra set of eyes and ears on a problem. Like all of those things have equal weight. And I think walking into a space and this is such a me culture we're living in, you know, like obviously I don't need that's not a novel thought, but a lot of it is like, how do I succeed? How do I get into the next step? How do I become a better designer? How do I? And like, if you can walk into some of the spaces or some of the challenges you're thinking about it in a way where you're thinking about the person or the people that you're going to be interacting with, it doesn't make ambiguity less daunting, but it just makes it a little bit more, it just removes it from your identity to like actually like, which I think we get really caught up in our identity sometimes, and ambiguity just heightens our insecurities in those moments. But if we can remove ourselves from it and be like, wait, there's more than just me that is in need here. There's actually something much bigger. This can impact the people around me, a larger audience of people I may never even know or meet. And it just kind of makes it like, I don't know. It just removes some of that challenge. And I think when I walked into companies during those 12 months, if I just realized, okay, I've got 4 weeks to try to do maybe 1, maybe 2 things really well to leave the campsite better than when I found it. That was a way to like remove the sort of daunting nature of I've got to be an amazing designer. I got to learn all this stuff. I just need to be helpful, you know, and find something I can do to be helpful. And I think that, at least for me, even still now, like if I'm talking to an HR director who's wanting learning and development programs, or I'm talking to the head of a department at a program that their students are sort of struggling to launch into their careers, I'm just looking for ways that I think I can help, whether it's like, let's try to design a tool that everyone gets, or let's try to design a 2 workshop experience where they wrestle with questions that everyone's wrestling with in their dorm rooms and not really talking about. Like, I'm just trying to be helpful, you know?
I'm I'm gonna sit on this idea a little bit of being helpful in this 12-month journey, just because I'm totally fascinated with it, and I know that so much has happened since then. But I wanted to know if, like, would you mind sharing with us, like, maybe one of those situations, right? One of those
Sure.
month-long sort of like stints
Yeah.
where, you know, the ambiguity of it all maybe sort of overcame, right? And another one where like everything just like this philosophy of helpfulness sort of truly showed the light, right?
Sure.
From
Sure.
how amazing that philosophy can be.
Sure. Yeah. So I would probably highlight, maybe like month 5, it was June that year. And I'd done a few projects. I'd built a little bit of a community, um, and I was a total nobody. This was not like a Good Morning America kind of like human interest story. This was like Victor and a couple hundred-ish friends. And someone had introduced me to someone in Seattle who worked at an architecture firm. And that somebody got me in for a 4-week sort of mini internship paid. I knew nothing about architecture, and he was in the experience design studio of NBVJ, one of the top 5 architecture firms in the world. And Sam, this guy, his name is Samuel Stubblefield, an incredible name, Samuel Stubblefield, tall, wiry, lanky guy that was sort of the darling of the architecture firm. I'm just like really bright and creative. And he's like, you're here not because you're an architect, you're here because you're not one. And we need help with this installation for Microsoft, where we're trying to bring some levity to their new healthcare facility that they're going to build on site. So the installation around what people are going to experience when they walk into the lobby, the waiting room, a lot of this stuff feels really stagnant and medically like oriented, right? So it's heavy. How do we add some levity? And so for that month, I was helping them design this like sort of interesting installation of adding play with health and wellness and medicine all into that lobby. But like, my nights were spent reading books, doing research on other installations, playgrounds, everything from playgrounds in schools to creative hospitals and children's hospitals and all sorts of other things that we could bring in. And I knew I was way out of my league, but just like doing that research, compiling all the elements that they might like, everything from materials to sounds to smells, how do we engage all 5 senses? Just coming in with all like basically literally on Sundays, like just piles of stuff in my hands, mixes of books and tennis balls and recording equipment, and just being like, okay, here's where I am today. They felt like, I mean, I literally got a job offer at the end of that month. And so, I obviously didn't take it, but it was just, I had no business being in that place, but just by coming in and hearing what they needed and starting to pick on pieces, pick up some slack, sort of under promise, over deliver a little bit. Like, I don't know what I can do, and then come in like, pulling an all-nighter on all this stuff. I think that went a long way that month, and I learned so much in those 4 short weeks. It was like, I think a little bit longer. I stayed through July 4th. Yeah. So that was
Amazing.
one of my favorites. Yeah.
Amazing. Yeah. So I guess I'm just going to continue this thread with on ambiguity a little bit with you, Timothy. And so I guess my question for you, and maybe through the lens of ambiguity, what does it mean to walk into these organizations, right, who has this sort of problem, but where does the problem sit? What is the framing of the problem? Who's the problem for? Like, how are you dealing with ambiguity, and what are you bringing to the table?
Yeah, well, one thing I want to highlight that actually Victor said, Victor, by the way, so inspired. I'm so inspired by all of us who are on this panel, but like, including you, Kareem. But like, one thing that you said, Victor, which is like, it is totally a novel thought that I'm never forgetting it, is like, one way to get past an ambiguity or navigate ambiguity is like just finding that human that's behind it and like just figuring out how to help that human, right? And so when it comes to like this world of doing like client work, right? And like it seems like we're trying to, like, a couple of our clients are like Capital One, Facebook, Instagram, New York Life Insurance. These are some of our bigger clients, and like it's not like we come in there and it's like we have to like shift this whole company. It's like it starts with a smaller touch point. It starts with somebody who is like recognizing that their employees are just like not, maybe they're not like happy. They might just not be happy in the workplace, and the culture of the workplace might be one that instead of you pulling the nose of your car into the parking lot, you're pulling the back of your car into the parking lot, and you want to get out of the parking lot as fast as possible at the end of the day, right? That's like a classic example of like a bad culture. If you look out the window and like people are wanting to get out the door right at 5 o'clock, right? We want to help these cultures, help these company cultures create a workplace where people actually care about each other, care about the work, there's purpose behind the work. And so coming back to your question with ambiguity, it's like we simply have really, really in-depth conversations when we're starting off with these companies. Like we don't start off with any sort of an agenda of ours. It starts off with these lengthy, warm, meaningful conversations with this leader or with this team and what they want to get out of potentially bringing us on board. And sometimes we find out through these conversations that we might not be the right fit. Or sometimes they just think they need design thinking. Or we're like, you don't need design thinking, you need something different. You might need a different set of skills, but people immediately jump to design thinking these days because it's a little bit buzzwordy, right? And so I guess when it comes to ambiguity, I would like to reiterate Victor's point, which is just like finding those humans and figuring out what's going on with them and creating a custom experience that will speak to those needs. The challenge is that as working in industry, people are always, especially in New York, trying to hustle and trying to do things really fast. So our challenge, we have this tension of like, we want to create really meaningful experiences that make long-term impact on the culture of the company and how people operate on a daily level. But we have to do it in like maybe 5 two-day workshops or something like that, And so that's our big tension and that's our big challenge. And ambiguity, I don't think there could be any more. I mean, there's so much ambiguity, there's so much uncertainty right now in the workforce because of the turbulent times that we're experiencing. And I think that, the way we're designing and shaping experiences is like changing a lot right now because of our whole situation.
Well, you also mentioned this idea of like conversation as like a core component of what your group does, and not only that, but this notion that you're the only sort of like person with a design degree there. So where are your colleagues coming from? Where are they bringing their expertise from into this design conversation?
Yeah, that's a really good question. I don't think any of their disciplines that they studied is really, I'm sure it's helping out in some ways, but like we got people who majored in communications, majored in marketing. We got people who mastered in change management, which that person does probably have a little bit more like expertise in these subjects. But then we also have people who just have like general business administration degrees. And I think just the culture of our company is one of just like, it's one of just like deep compassion for others and taking time to understand what other people is about. So it's less about like anything that has to do with our degrees. They just are cultivating a workplace where we really spend the time to check in with each other. And that means that translates into us really figuring out how to check in with these people that we're designing for, these people that are paying us money to help deliver some sort of workshop that's supposed to help their company make a shift toward creating something that's better for their end users. So I don't think it has much to do with the degrees or anything that we have. It has to do with this kind of a work environment that we have that encourages us to take time to actually really deeply listen to these executives or maybe these managers who are challenged by something in the workplace.
Okay, awesome. I want to shift slightly. I have a question that I've been burning to ask. And so like the question is if you were a student now, right? how would you be planning for the next year? Leaning into or approaching a career in design, right? This question, thinking about, maybe even a little bit about where we are right now, right? How would you, if you could, maybe some of you who've been out for a little bit, if you could go back into your senior year or junior year, like how would you, start to reimagine your next year moving forward? What would you tell yourself? That was a somewhat packed question, but
I can speak a little bit and then maybe build off what they add. I think that when I was thinking about this question earlier, the biggest advice that I would give is honestly the advice that I'm still telling myself right now, and that's to keep taking your next best step forward. Like, we don't know ever, but especially now, exactly what the future is going to hold. And so don't worry too much about exactly where you'll be in 30 years or even 5 years or maybe even 6 months if the world is too uncertain right now for you to feel like you know where you want to be in 6 months. It's more about like, what do you think is the next best thing to do right now? And honestly, the career paths make so much more sense in retrospect, right? Like I'm Tim and Victor, I'm sure you guys can speak to that. Like I'm sure Victor, when you became a youth pastor, you didn't expect that you would be doing what you're doing now. I think that's the case for a lot of people these days. And like hopefully I made it clear earlier, I didn't decide for sure that I wanted to become a teacher until December of my senior year of college. And I'm working with people who decided much later in life that they wanted to be a teacher. And even when I think about how I became involved with the Hive in the first place, like this community, this organization that have had such a big impact for me, that started from reading Pomona's Chirps newsletter on a random day, hearing about a random workshop and deciding to show up and then asking how I could be more involved. Like it could have been this tiny little blip in my existence, just like all of these other events that I went to at Pomona that didn't lead to anything transformative or life-changing at all, that were just an event. But then kind of like you take that step, and then when you see something else that looks good, you take that step, and then you keep thinking, where might I go next? Where might I go next? Where might I go next? And sometimes you want to take the long view on that. But I still don't know what I'll be doing in 5 years. But I know for now, I want to be teaching at my same school. I have certain ideas about where I want to get better next and what I want to do for my students. But I expect that when I get to 3 years from now, then I'll have a better idea of what I want to be doing 5 years from now. And that's kind of my approach to it. So I would, particularly in these times of uncertainty, keep that in mind. And yeah.
Great. Yeah, I love that. Just focus on your next step and do your best in that moment. Victor, what about what would you say to yourself, if you were in school now?
I really like that piece of advice, Gail. I think I appreciate like the focusing on like the sort of windy path that everyone takes. I feel like in college, I thought like everyone just kind of landed in that spot, like whatever spot they're in. And it was just like, man, I can't wait to get there, and I feel like a lot of students experience that today. I don't know if I was talking about now, I think I would take some of the pressure off to land. What I do. Maybe the two things that I would tell myself is one, like learn to tell the story of like, tell your own story in a way that helps people understand sort of where you've been and what you can do. Your resume, your degree, your GPA, all that stuff is fine. But if you can talk about the projects that you approached and why you approach them or how you approach them, like I feel like those people are so much more compelling to work with. Like, when you meet someone who got fascinated with some sort of insect and they like decided to study it for a period of time, or someone who was like a woodworker like and decided to really play in that arena for a while, or playwrights or writing, or started like a club or an organization or something. Like those people who can talk about not only what they did but why and how they did it end up becoming really, like, the conversations are really compelling, and then you kind of want to work with them. You kind of want to like, or keep talking with them. So I feel like if you can start finding your curiosities now, tinkering with those curiosities, playing with them. I guess I'm talking to younger Victor, like keep trying interesting things, but know how you can talk about them and how they tie back to what you want to be doing next. So yeah, personal storytelling is one thing. And just sit across from as many people as you can and ask them how they got to where they got to. We call it tracing steps. Like the story, the permission I would have as a college student is so is so much greater than I think I knew whenever I was in college, to call somebody up and say, hey, I'm just getting started. Would you give me 20 minutes? I don't want a job. I don't want anything from you. I just want you to tell me some of the more important steps you took, or some of the things you would do differently about navigating these days. You have that calling card all day long. Use it. And then start putting together some of the themes you hear. And you'll learn a lot about people. People will talk about how they overworked or they neglected their health, or people will talk about overvaluing a paycheck, or people might talk about, trips or left turns they wish they would have taken to be taken the less safer route, but it'll be good for you to hear it firsthand.
Yeah, I love that idea of personal storytelling. I feel like we're constantly moving through the world, right, with a sort of a soundtrack sort of going, right? Something in the back of our mind, we're constantly narrating what's happening, and
Sure.
But projecting that forward isn't always top of mind, right? And really being intentional about that. So that's a really great piece of advice. Thank you for that. Learn how to tell your story. I love that. Timothy, how about you? What would you tell Timothy now if he were in school?
Yeah. Well, I mean, just outside of just the discipline of design, just being a senior in college right now, period. I think I would tell myself I think I would remind myself that no matter what you learn in school, I know 4 years of education is going to give you a lot, no matter what school you're at. But at the end of the day, the skills that you learn in college are probably not going to set you up for life. And so I would keep in mind that you got to figure out ways to keep learning and keep stoking your curiosity. And I would say take the direction that is just going to that is probably just most curious to you. Take the direction that's going to push you as a learner. That's going to push you to want to learn more. I'd also say take agency as a senior in college. I think the best thing you can do in any work, applying to a job, is show that you're passionate about something. Passion goes a long way. And if you're just going through college checking off the boxes, that's probably not going to help fuel your passion for something. So I would figure out what you're passionate about and just over deliver on that thing like no other, and then when you leave and you have this, again, I think project-based work is really good. Like Victor said, when you leave with a portfolio, even if the portfolio just has 2 projects in it, but if your passion for those projects is overflowing and you show up to a workplace talking about those, they'll sense that. They'll sense your energy, and it'll help you, I think in the long run, acquire positions and find other collaborators who want to work with you. Speaking of collaborators, I would say there's I think education is all about kind of oneness kind of, and sometimes it's always about fueling your head. It's a very heady thing. It's all about we're always trying to design for one people, but I feel there's a really healthy shift happening right now in education and industry more broadly about collaboration. I think we can continue to push that. And I feel like figuring out those people who are around you who like make you excited to work with and taking on side projects with them is like a really healthy thing to do. Because you like never have, even though it seems like you're totally like don't have any time in college, you probably never have more time in your life, to be honest. It's like, and that's a great time to like pick up a side project that like encourages collaboration with somebody outside of your discipline, and then doing something cool with them, and that just adds to your portfolio. So I would say, like, in a nutshell, like, figure out ways to keep learning, take agency, like take on side projects, find some awesome people to collaborate with, and just, you know, really head in the direction of what you're passionate about.
I love that. I wanna follow up with you on one question on that really quickly. But
Yeah.
first, I wanted to. We have about 15 minutes left, and I want to open up questions to the audience. So if you can maybe type your questions into the chat, and then we can put some of those. I can ask some of those questions to the panel here. And I love this idea about passion and collaboration, because you've done some really interesting work. You know, we talked a little bit about the design gym, but you have that interesting project right now going on in Virginia, right?
Yep.
You want to talk a little bit about that and how you know, like, I don't know, I think I find it a fascinating exercise, and it reminds me a little bit about what Victor is doing, and reimagining education a little bit.
Yeah, so I'll just try to give you a quick overview of it. Is about a year and a half ago, a former professor of mine had a radical vision, but he needed a team to execute on it. And so we wanted to, what we're piloting right now is a tuition-free school that is void of accreditation, void of disciplines, and our goal is to help. I guess you could say it's a hybrid design studio and school for architecture that has a huge focus on sustainability. But we don't want people leaving feeling like they're architects or feeling like they're designers. We want them leaving feeling like they're landers. And this is this idea that we don't really believe in disciplines, but we believe in people figuring out ways to practice self-actualization. And we think that a lot of the accreditation that we're seeing out in the world, and as well as the burden of tuition and the student loan debt crisis, is actually preventing creativity. And so we wanted to create some sort of entity that gets rid of that, so people can like really have a wholesome ground for creativity and discovery. Because what we're seeing is that because of the student loan debt crisis, we're seeing that people graduate from school and maybe they made a poor choice in terms of a major, or maybe they're forced into something that they didn't really want to get a degree in. And before you know it, they're graduated and they have a ton of loans. So they have to jump into a career or a job that they might not really want, but they have to because of, you know, their parents can't support them any longer. So, and we also find that a lot of accreditation, although accreditation is really good, and we're not saying there shouldn't be schools without accreditation, because let's say you're actually trying to become an engineer or architect or whatever, you still need to figure out how to make sure a roof doesn't fall on somebody's head. But so there's a time and place, but we actually find that we are trying to make a model for experimentation. We're trying to at least create a model that inspires other people to think about the impact of tuition and the impact of accreditation on somebody's academic careers. And so Umbau is in its first year of piloting, and it's a tuition-free school. And we had a successful crowdfund last year for $40,000. And this year we're raising more money to help build out this model. And you can find out more about it on umbauschool.org, UMBAU, and then school.org.
Wow, that's amazing. Yeah, I love that concept. Again, like this disrupting of like how we even engage in education and what creativity is, and talk about ambiguity. I mean, like you come out as a lander. That's awesome. So I wanted to, like I said, I opened it up to the audience for a few questions. And so I just want to put a couple of questions out, and maybe I'll throw out like 2 or 3 questions, and you know, whoever feels most passionate about the question can answer it. So the first one was, what was a key pivotal learning point for you that changed or furthered how you think about design?
I can jump into that one really quickly. So I remember when I was a senior at James Madison University and I was studying industrial design, I was also getting involved in like running workshops. Some things related to creativity, some things related to design, but some things sometimes not. And I remember one of the first pop-up classes that I hosted was like sold out. There's like 30 students showed up for this pop-up class. It was on 3D printing, which back in like 2014 was like a total hot topic back then, you know. And I just coordinated the workshop. I did the marketing. I lined up actually the creative director of Where in the World is Carmen Sandiego, and to run the workshop. And he did this workshop and basically walked into the room and he leaned on the 3D printer and just talked about it the whole time. And he just pointed to it. He talked about how cool it is. He talked about how it's been around since like the 80s. And I looked around and all these people were like around my age. It was a complete snooze fest, you know, like everybody was almost falling asleep. And I was just like, oh shit. Like, I'm like, as a designer, like one doesn't just have to think about the experience of like using a vacuum or like figuring out the knobs on a toaster oven. One could actually design the moment somebody walks into a classroom to the moment they leave. And like at that point, I felt so much more responsible for creating better experiences because I was like, I don't want to put my friends who I said this was going to be awesome. Like, I was like, this is going to be so awesome. It's going to be great. I don't want to put them through another experience like this. So in terms of design, like that was like one of my biggest pivotal moments because it didn't help me just think about design as like a thing that had to deal with tangibles. It helped me think about design as like really somebody's experience more broadly and it also made me think about learning and how like you can actually design and shape somebody's learning experience if you're intentional about it. So that was a huge pivotal moment for me.
Wow. Yeah, that's real. I teach and I definitely am aware of instances of snoozing and the desire to sort of not have that happen.
Yeah.
Okay, so I'll leave that question open, and Gail or Victor, if you want to answer that. But I'm also going to ask another question. I'll throw another question up for you. What would you say is the biggest risk you've taken? This is by what would you say the biggest risk you've taken in your path towards a design career, and what was the outcome?
Gail, do you have something?
I'm thinking. I think a lot of the steps I've taken in my career so far have been relatively safe risks in that I never really worried about being completely without an income or being homeless or not being able to support my family or anything like that. So I think none of those, I haven't experienced risks like that. I think the biggest risk for me that I'm perceiving right now is this about a year ago, actually almost exactly a year ago, when I decided to leave the school that I was teaching at last year for a new school. And it's a long story, but the short version is that my first year of teaching last year was really, really difficult and is by far the most challenging thing I've ever done in my entire life. And so I heard about a new school, which was in Southern California. I was living in the Bay Area last year, so I'd have to move. It sounded really awesome, but I was really worried about it not being as awesome as it sounded. I was really nervous that if I let myself believe wholeheartedly in this school that I wanted to move to, and then I ended up getting disappointed, that it would really tear me apart and like really make me not want to be a teacher at all anymore. And so making that decision to leave the school that was familiar, even if it wasn't the place where I was happy, felt was a really big risk. And it in this case, it paid off, and I sort of did my research and I did my due diligence to know that, like, I think it would, like, I had set myself up to probably have a good experience that I was moving to. And it turned out fantastically. I love the school that I'm teaching at. I'm so much happier here. But it was a really scary risk to take about a year ago.
Great, thank you for sharing that. Okay, I have another question here. Victor, I'm gonna throw this one your way. How do you discover what you may be most passionate about? And how do you develop a project or portfolio around that?
Yeah, I've been toying around with that question for a bit now, because this idea of like student-directed learning and agency and learning means that you have to sort of put the student in the driver's seat, but how do you also give them a little bit of a map, or at least a starting point? And a lot of times when I sit down and chat with students, I start with like 3 questions. Think about challenges, makes, and people. So challenges are, what is it that saddens you, frustrates you, what do you wish were different, either in your life, your community, or your world? So it could be something as small as like, gosh, I wish my toothbrush was something that I wouldn't have to just throw away, and like, I don't know what away means. And then that might open up a whole other world about, trash and sustainability and materials. Think about the challenges. List out everything you care about. Anything goes. Anything you've ever felt sad or frustrated about. Then jump over to make. When do you lose track of time because you're doing something you enjoy so much? Whether it's writing, it's producing films or plays, or it's building, you're in a studio, you're painting. When do you lose track of time? And then, who do you like to spend time with? Is it other people in a similar profession? Is it people that are doing something sort of opposite to you, but you can bounce back and forth? If it's athletes, if it's students, if it's educators, if it's healthcare professionals, who do you want to spend time with? Okay, so if you have those 3 lists, you can start now drawing connections between them. So let's say you care about mental health, you love to do performances, and you like working with artists. Let's take those 3 things and let's find out what projects we can design around those things. A local play around mental health that maybe adds levity to the topic, or maybe tells a story of someone in your community or someone you might know. That's just like one quick idea. I could go on with you. But the point is there are these clues all around, inside of you and around you, around things that you can build projects around. And then once you decide something, think about a time frame, 30, 60, 90 days, a semester, a quarter, a summer, and scope it out and document everything you do along the way. The last thing I would say, if you do something like this, is build a community around it. 2, 3, 4 friends, maybe someone that you really admire, respect, that you want to sort of impress, maybe even a little bit, that is going to hold you accountable to this whole thing, and let them sort of be part of that community, so you feel like a little bit of urgency and ownership of actually making this thing come to life.
Nice. Yeah, I threw that at you because I feel in a way you sort of deal in passions, right? Like excavating them and then helping to sort of breathe life into them, right? And
Sure, yeah.
And so yeah, you have a number of tools, and so all of you folks out there, the Experience Institute, like I said, I believe sort of deals in passions and helping to uncover. And you go to the website, there are a number of great tools there. I'm sure I give you an opportunity, as we're winding down, to talk a little bit about that, Victor, as well. So, but we only have a few more minutes, and so what I want to do is I want to just open it up to you 3. Are there any ideas or questions or statements that you just want to make to a group of liberal arts students, or we may have a number of other students here, but people who are sitting down right now listening to this panel, what would you say as like a end note to this idea of creativity and design and in tomorrow's profession?
That's a tough one. We all got to think it over.
Yeah, yeah. Well,
I can start real quick. I can,
okay.
yeah,
Great.
I think everyone's making it up for the most part. Like, you know, it really, I think everyone really is. And everyone is sort of like, every person needs some sort of amount, some amount of approval, security, or control. And if you can just lower your levels of those wanting those three things, you will make up more interesting things. So if you just lower how much approval you want from other people, you'll take bigger risks. If you lower how much security you want, how much money or nice things you want, you'll take bigger, more interesting risks. If you lower how much control you want over a situation, it'll be more like jazz as opposed to trying to be more rigid, and you'll do more interesting things. So everyone's making it up, and if you can just lower those three things, you will make up more interesting things.
I love that statement. I love that, this idea of it's a lowering of the barriers, right? But not a but a heightening of your sort of trust in yourself in a way, right?
Yes, yeah,
I think
totally.
fantastic. Gail, what about you? Do you have a end statement for the community here?
Yeah. I feel like Victor's inspired other thoughts too, so now I'm kind of thinking about those in the moment. One thing, I said two things. One is do what you need to do to give yourself the safe base from which you can take those risks. And in some cases, that might mean like knowing what people are going to have your back if you need to talk something through or get into a sticky situation, and practicing that skill for yourself of asking for help when you get stuck, which can be really hard, especially if you've been used most of your life to handling things on your own. Another thing in that line of coming up with a safe base is like work on yourself, like figure out where your insecurities come from, and what kinds of things make you feel confident and what kinds of things make you feel nervous. And, you know, think about like, keep trying to become a better person yourself, like by yourself or with a group of friends or with a therapist or any of those kinds of things, like can be so important to then have the confidence to lean into new opportunities and to figure out where you want to take your direction. And then the other thing that I was thinking about is something that I mean, both of you, but I think especially Tim talked about earlier, is particularly in this time of the COVID-19 response and all of the shifts that that's leading to in all of our practices, is try your best to keep the focus on people and not technical solutions. And that's something that is coming up a lot in teaching right now. All of our classrooms have moved to a distance in one way or another across the entire world practically. And some people get really focused on technical solutions, like what platform am I going to use? What settings am I going to turn on? How am I going to assign and collect work? And the other perspective that you can take is who are the other people who are being impacted by this right now? And what do they need? What are they worried about? What are they thinking about? And that goes back to what I said at the beginning about making sure that you are really paying attention to and looking for what people need in a certain situation. And even though the technical solutions are an important part of that, making sure that you're orienting yourself towards people, I think is important now more than ever.
Yeah, amazing. Thanks for bringing that full circle back to humanity. Tim?
Oh, no. Okay. Yeah, so I'm going to build on kind of what Gail said here. I think that, you know, remaining oriented toward the people that you care most about or you're designing for is really important. And I also want to like kind of add to that thought in that most people are looking at a lot of the disadvantages of studying remotely or working remotely right now. But there's a lot of like pretty like obvious benefits. You know, flexibility, or like maybe it's making a positive impact on the environment, or because you're not commuting and you're saving money and stuff like that. But I think what I want to point out is like a benefit, or maybe even an opportunity, is that this whole coronavirus thing, although it's devastating, it's very sad, and we got to keep working hard to get out of it. I think I'm actually looking at this whole thing as reframing it as an opportunity for design intervention, even more so. And I think this is, if anything, this whole thing has proven that actually the whole world is a little bit more connected than we thought it was. And it's not through technology, it's actually through like biology, actually. You know, it's actually through like, we can all contract the same thing. But what if we shared something that was just as impactful as a pandemic, except it was a positive thing? What if it was like fearlessness or connectivity, or just simple like acts of kindness, like Victor was talking about earlier, and helping people, right? I think this whole thing is actually more of an opportunity than anything. And I think as a closing thought, and this is not an original thought, but I always try keeping this in mind. It's kind of like my anchor in life, is that when things are really tough, I just try to remember that the most essential things in life are actually invisible to the human eye. You know, it's like love and connection, and it sounds cheesy, but at the end of the day, it's like, it's the things that like makes me feel anchored as a human, and it makes me figure out how I can best comfort the people who are around me and the people who are in my workplace.
Amazing. Well, okay. So this was amazing. You three are amazing, and I can't, say how grateful I am to have had opportunity to sit here and draw from you all some of these ideas. I'm actually going to leave and put some stuff down in my journal to give me some ideas. So thank you. And so I want to thank you all for taking part in this. I think that 1 second here. Yeah, I think that this was amazing, and I hope that the students, the folks who are here engaging, gain some insights. And I can't wait to talk to you all offline, which I hope that we can continue having these conversations. All you guys continue doing amazing work, and continue inspiring and being amazing humans. And hopefully we'll be hearing from you all soon in some way, shape, or form.